Hi everyone, welcome back to the Claremont Classic Garage. Today we're going to continue fiddling around with our big CompAir mobile compressor here. Let's see if we can get it working a little more properly. So in the last video we monkeyed around with it. We got the starter working. We had to do a bit of a hack job on the pinion gear in it, but we've got it working. And we finally got to the point where we determined that we have a fuel supply problem. So basically from here up, the delivery side of the fuel system seems to be working fine. It's the supply side. We would get the thing and let it sit for a little bit and then crank it over and it would start right up. It would run for a few seconds and then quit. And what I did was I opened the vent here, and instead of a good strong stream of fuel flowing, there was hardly a trickle. So I think, if you remember, we found some algae in the fuel filter. I think there's a bunch of it here in the tank, and it's blocking the port here to the valve. So we're going to go ahead now. First thing we're going to do is drain the tank. And while the tank is draining, I'm going to try and rig up some kind of a remote fuel supply, and we'll see if we can get it running on that. Well, it still seems to be flowing out reasonably well. I'm not sure what to think of this now. Well, we'll just keep letting it run. And then once it's finished running, I'm still maybe going to take out that valve and just make sure everything is clean. And then we'll hook it all back up and start all over again. I did just now take the cap off and look down inside the tank, and it's clean in there. There's not great big globs of goo floating around in there, so I'm not sure what to think at this point, but we'll keep fiddling around with it. Well, I blew some air up the line, and I definitely felt something or heard something go pop, and then the fuel started running again. So I think there may have been something clogging that valve a little bit. It's back just kind of dribbling a little bit. So we're going to let that finish, and then we'll take this thing apart and see what we see. I've got my small remote tank set up here through our filter, and I'm going to fill it up with some fuel. And we'll see what comes out the vent. Then we'll close it up and see if it'll run off of this. Okay, see there, we got a decent stream of fuel coming out of it. Good, no air. We'll try and crank it up, I guess, and see what happens. Well, it's running, but apparently it's got some issues. I figure I'll let it run for a minute and see what happens. Well, now I got antifreeze, or sort of half antifreeze, half water coming out of it. I better get a bucket. And mercifully, it ran out of fuel. So what we got to do next, I think, is I got to get the injectors out of it and see if we can give them no new parts rebuild like we did on the Oliver. The one positive through that whole thing that I found was the charging system works. It was charging the battery. So that's at least something. And it ran, and it kept running. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead now and pull the injectors out of this thing, and we'll see what we can find out. All right, so here's injector number one. I didn't really find anything too amiss in the other two, so we might be barking up the wrong tree here, but it doesn't hurt to see what's inside them. So first thing we're going to do is go over to the buffing wheel and clean up this thread on the top here, and we're going to clean up this thread here on the bottom. And a 19 millimeter socket off with that jam nut. And all that does is lock the return fitting down onto the top of it. Now we're going to get a 15/16 deep socket and blast that off. That's basically the cap. And away we go. There. You don't have to buzz it right off. Just get it loose. What we are not going to mess with is this set screw here. This is set at the injection shop when they calibrate the injectors to whatever engine they're going in, and you shouldn't mess with that. So now we're going to take this apart. Let me get the tripod. Okay, so in here, there's not too much really in these things. Is the top. We take that off. There's the spring. And then in there, there's the little seat for the spring. Now, at this end, we've got, that's the bottom seat for the spring. And now we're going to get to that thing comes out. And now there's our nozzle. Or the center of our nozzle. The nozzle, this guy goes down there, and when he's seated, we don't want to mess with that. You got to be really careful with these things. There we go. That seats against the inside of the nozzle there and seals the injector off. When it sends the pulse up from the pump, it unseats that, and the fuel flows around that needle and comes out, sprays in a cone shape on the top of the piston. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get these two parts buffed up, cleaned up, and then we're going to start getting everything ready to go back together. So once we've got this is the actual base of the injector. Once we got that cleaned up, then we're going to clean it all out with brake clean, WD-40, anything you got. Clean it out and blow it out really, really good. And we've got our nozzle cleaned. We just cleaned it up with a lint-free cloth. And we're going to get it down in there. And it's got to go in. It's got to fit perfectly dry. So just like that. It's just a hair off from being a press fit. It's as precise as it can be. And it needs to just move perfectly like that. With a little drag on it. That's perfect. Next thing that goes in is this little seat. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to get an oil stone here and just do a couple of figure eights on either side. It's probably better to do this on a piece of glass with some emery on it, but this is what we've got. And then the same thing, we're going to blow this all out and sit it back in there. Then this little spring seat goes in with the hollow part facing down because it fits over our needle. And the spring sits on there. Now, same thing here. See this here? There's no gasket there. This has to seal against that to keep the fuel from leaking. So same thing. We're just going to do a couple of figure eights on here. And likewise, we'll rinse it off and blow it out good. Then the top spring seat goes in. Make sure, look down there, make sure it's in flat. Whoops. Then we screw the two halves of it back together. Just hand tight till it seats down. There. Now I'm going to put a little anti-seize on the thread. And we're going to go screw it back into the head. And we'll tighten it by this. That'll tighten both halves kind of at once. I have got no torque reference for any of this stuff, so we're just going to give it a good reef by hand. Now we're going to get all these things cleaned up and we can put them back on. They're brass. There's no seal rings or anything on this. They just rely on being crushed down to seal, so we have to be very careful and make sure it's all clean. Now we got all the return fittings on. We tighten the nuts down, put the little return hoses on. Now we can go put the actual high pressure lines back on and we can try again. Right, it's all back together. The lines are loose at the injector. We've got fuel in our cup here. We've bled it out. Now we're gonna crank it over and see if we can get some fuel up to these injectors. Then we'll try to start it again. Okay, there it is. We got fuel up top. Okay, let's see what happens this time. Oh, there's smoke coming out. Right here. It's doing the same routine. Well, that's the best it's going yet. Starts out okay and then it goes to hell. We seem to have a radiator problem too, but, okay, so what I found with this thing here, like we suspected, when there's no load and the air pressure builds up, it's supposed to go down to idle. That's what this thing does. And when the air pressure in this thing drops because it's working, the engine goes to full song. We can hear that. It was running nice, you know. So what we have to do first is we've got to get the cooling system sorted out. I haven't given up on this, but the problem is the neck is broken off the radiator. So we're going to have to get the radiator out of this thing, get this soldered back on, and figure out the cooling system, get some water in it, etc. But that was like the best it ran. I'm going to open this thing again, and we're going to crank it up. Yeah, it runs really good. So I would see we're slowly gaining on this thing. When it's running, I could see here, that's the fuel racks. That's what meters the amount of fuel it injects. I see those working. What I see is the problem is when the air pressure gets built up and it goes down to idle, it quits. So I kind of think what we have to do is this idle screw here, we need to just turn up this idle a little bit and get this thing idling at a little higher speed. And I think that will help us a lot with that. One thing at a time, eh? And then I got it, it was really steaming. I don't know if it was because there's no water in it and it was boiling what's in the block, or it's quite possible there could be an internal engine problem that's pressurizing the cooling system. I'm not too sure about that. We're going to get at this radiator here and see what we can do with it. I'm not sure. I've got an old 4-core rad around here somewhere out of an old Dodge truck. If we have to, we'll use that. We'll figure that out one step at a time. But we're gaining on it. It runs, and when it's making air, like when it's pushing air and it's running at high speed, it runs darn good. And I could get it, you know, slowly closing off that air valve and letting this throttle it back. It's slowly. It was running really good until it got right down to the low speed, and then it would quit. So I kind of think we just have to turn up that low speed screw a tiny bit, and we might be okay. Like you can see there is a little bit of wear on that arm that touches the screw, and I kind of wonder that if over time it's worn that away a little bit so that it won't idle, you know. Who knows? Okay. We need to figure out the cooling system, because it was kind of boiling over and there was steam and stuff coming out of it. And I do know that the filler neck for the radiator is, well, you can see there, it's discombobulated from the actual radiator. So what I want to do now, I want to know if it was boiling over because there's a problem with the engine, or maybe there's just so little coolant in it that the water pump wasn't able to move anything, and what was in the block was starting to boil. So what we're going to do is we're going to drain it just to see how much we get out of it, and then we'll I might fill it right up with water and start it up again and see what happens. It's hard to see, but the drain valve for the radiator is right there. I've got it open all the way, and well, there's nothing coming out. So either that means this is plugged, which is quite common, or the cooling system is totally empty. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to close this up, and then we're going to go around and open the drain valve on the engine block on the other side. This valve is stuck and doesn't want to open, so we're going to try to get it unscrewed from the block. Another thing I'd like to mention at this point is somehow I had it in my mind that this was an Isuzu engine. It is not. It is a Shibara, S-H-I-B-A-U-R-A, Shibara engine. They made lots of diesel engines in Japan. That's the model of the engine. It's a LEM 853, 1429 cc. So at least we know what it is now. Like I said, this engine was used in little Ford tractors. It was used in all kinds of things, including this compressor. Well, I took the valve right out of the bottom of the radiator and nothing at all. Not one drop came out. I find that odd. I think it's plugged. So I took the valve out of the side of the engine block here, and all we're getting is this little trickle. But I wonder if this is plugged with guck back in here. And no, there you go. She is bone dry empty. So that, I guess, would explain all the smoke and steam and stuff that was coming out of it yesterday. So what I got to do now, I got to let this kind of drain out. And then I'm going to put a plug in it. Unfortunately, I destroyed the nice little valve that was in there. So we'll have to come up with something else to plug that hole. We'll put the drain valve back in the radiator. I'm going to fill it up with just tap water and see if it leaks or doesn't leak. And then we'll try to get this thing cranked back up and see if it keeps its cool. I've got the drains back in the cooling system, so it's closed up at the bottom. So now we're just going to fill it up with straight water and let it sit. First, we're going to see if it leaks. Then we'll go from there. The cooling system seems to be full, so I'm going to let that kind of just sit for a minute and make sure no air bubbles come out. While we wait on that, I'm going to cut the seal on this, and we are going to turn up the curb idle speed a little bit on this thing. So all we got to do is loosen this lock nut and turn this in a couple of turns with a screwdriver and get it so that this thing will idle without stalling. Okay, now I'm going to try and start it up and see if we can get the silly thing to idle. I've got the air valve open right now, so it shouldn't build pressure, or it shouldn't build it too quickly. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's still a little bit hard to start, but I'm not too concerned with that. It's running it off this remote thing. It gets air in it, and there's other problems like that. Plus, it does have a block heater. We're missing the cord, so I think that'll help it a lot too with the starting. It's not really cold today, but it's cool, you know. So anyway, now that we're convinced that the thing runs and it operates, in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to go over it. We're going to completely service it. Engine oil, compressor oil. This fuel pump, apparently you have to change the oil in it separately. It's got its own sump, so we got to look into that and figure it out. We're going to get this fuel tank cleaned out, put a fan belt on it. We've got new air filters, both for the inlet of the compressor and for the actual air intake of the engine. And I may have to take a bunch of stuff apart because I think the radiator may leak a little bit. Not 100% sure on that, but I have to take this all apart to change the belt anyway. Oh, and there's the numbers right there. I got to look that up and make sure I get the right belt for this thing. And we have to figure out, originally I thought it was charging, but now it seems to not be charging. So we got to look into that. So we're going to kind of do 2 or maybe 3 videos. The first, we're going to get the engine and compressor part of it all up to snuff. And then we will worry about the actual trailer. Getting these bearings packed and wheel bolts. And I may get some, if these are not trailer tires, I don't think they are. Look, 175, 70, 13. They're car tires. This one's cracked pretty badly. I have to see if there's some 13-inch trailer tires on sale at Princess Auto. We'll get some proper trailer tires on it. I also want to put some tail lights on it, and I've got some of them things that stick out, you know, so you can see the thing when you're backing up. Yeah, you can see there. Radiator's leaking. So we'll see what we got to do with that. I may end up just getting rid of all of this stuff and just use a radiator from a car and an electric fan. We'll see what we got to do when we get in there. That's a job for another day. I also want to look up some specifications, and I want to get in here and lash the valves, make sure that's all good. And we still need to do something with this starter because it still does miss occasionally when you're trying to crank the thing. It really needs a starter drive. So I'm gonna look into that. There seems to be 2 different versions of this starter. The one version is less than $200 and the other version is $400. And so far, honestly, the only real thing I could see different about them is the housing on the back of it. I'm going to work on that. I'm going to find out what I can find out. If I could find out what kind of starter it is, I'd be able to look it up that way. Anyway, one thing at a time. We're making good progress, so I think we've got us a mobile compressor now. So I guess I'll wrap this one up now. That was good. At least we know now the thing runs, and it runs well. That's good. That's not a bad little engine. They made lots of them. You can find these engines all over the place in all kinds of different, in welding machines, compressors, generators, tractors, subcompact tractors. There's lots of them around. Anyway, it's great. I'm happy. I'm going to go now. I'd like to thank you for tuning into our channel. I hope you'll come back and see us again. And until then, I'm Kevin, saying so long from the Claremont Classic Garage.